Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy and find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler. And today we're talking about
reacting rationally to red flags. And so this is something that requires us to do some clarification. I think a lot of people are familiar with the notion of a red flag, something that sets you off and you say, oh, I better watch this person here. But there isn't a universally consensus agreed upon definition of red flags. So, before we start looking at what other people have to say, Dan, do you have a handy one-liner about what a red flag is?
an indicator of potential extra negative things.
Extra negative. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I think a lot of people use this term a bit carelessly these days, just like they use other, terms like gaslighting. Like anytime, you manipulate somebody or lie to them, it's gaslighting. No, gaslighting is something a little bit more specific. And maybe, before we call something a red flag, we have to have, a certain threshold of problem. Yeah.
I guess usually it's in response to someone that you're in a relationship to, although it doesn't have to be something romantic. It can be hey, you want to be working with this person. You want, to be a close friend with this person. These are all things that are something that you're trying to kind of suss out, especially when you're new to that person, to kind of figure out what they're like and what are their values. And some things are just, they're going to be quirks to the personality, so no one's going to be exactly like you. But other things are potential, will result in really negative outcomes for you or them or both.
I like that emphasis on novelty. If you are just noticing red flags with somebody that you've been in a relationship with, like a personal relationship or a business relationship, 10 years in and their personality hasn't radically changed in that time, you could be you just weren't paying attention that entire time, or now you know more, but odds are somebody's going to look at you and say, you're only noticing that red flag now,
Right. So you should not expect figs in winter, right?
Right, yeah.
Or if it's a fig tree, you should not expect it to grow oranges. That people usually have a especially as they get older, settle into certain patterns and norms.
Yeah.
They can change, but it's not usually the norm.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, that you mentioned that, because I suppose you could say that as the culture changes, there are some things that were not red flags before, and then they get seen as by other people as red flags. Mm-hmm. Right? But
I guess could...
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was thinking the different ways that people, might generationally look and what are the values that they look for in a partner, for example, and it might change over time. And as our society moved away from the single man breadwinner to a multi income household, that has really changed some of the values and the expectations, both socially and economically, for each of those individuals, and what would be considered virtuous or excellent of someone in one era would be probably really detrimental of the other. That, for example, if you're in a relationship and you've got a 2-income household and you're still expecting the wife to take care of all of the household chores, and
extra labor,
right? Then you're probably going to have an unhappy spouse.
I was just laughing because I was thinking about how over the course of, my lifetime, attitudes about smoking in public spaces have changed so much. Because I was a smoker when I was young. I started smoking when I was 17 and then continued on really through my 20s. And there were, a lot of places where you could smoke, and then they changed the laws. And when they did it, all the smokers were up in arms. Oh, this is tyranny. This is awful. Who are they to do that? And then we started to realize, once we stopped smoking and the haze cleared away, just the terrible burden that we were putting on all the non-smokers. And now, if I were a smoker, I wouldn't think of lighting up at a bar or, places like that. As a matter of fact, we went to, this is totally off topic, but it just kind of illustrates that. We went to some music festivals over the last summer, and we almost had to leave because when you're in these open air festivals, suddenly like all the smokers are just constantly smoking, and it's so thick. If you're not used to it, it's your eyes start burning and your sinuses get messed up, and if somebody were to like walk into my classroom and just light up after class is over, like we used to do as college students. And professors would do too. That would be a red flag, right? But in 1990, that wouldn't have been a red flag. That would have been considered normal behavior.
And for when I was in college, there were quite a few international students, and from other cultures, especially like the Chinese nationals. The smoking culture is quite large. At least it was, when I was in college, and so like the regular American student body wasn't smoking, but you'd see large portions of these Chinese nationals that were just their cultural norm, and it's totally outside of what we would expect.
Yeah. So let's come back to what are red flags? There like I said, there's no consensus definition, but we can say that a lot of things about it that kind of flesh out the concept. We could say that there's something that appears within the scope of a possible or actual, maybe starting or continuing relationship, and there's a lot of venues in which this can happen. You talked about romantic relationships. I think a lot of people associate red flags with that, but we can also talk about the workplace or business partners, that we look at and we're like, I'm not sure about this proposal. Academic institutions, I actually asked my students today about red flags, and I asked them about professors, how do they tell who is going to be a problematic professor? And they came up with, some of the things that they'd observed for, professors who are the ones to avoid unless you can't get out of their classes. But there's other things that we found. So there's a great Psychology Today post by Abigail Brenner. And I like this phrase, and I'd be curious to see what you think about this. Intuitive indicators that something needs to be questioned. Is that, that's the intuitive thing. That's like our gut sense. Is that enough that it needs to be questioned? Or do we need to go further for it to be a red flag? What do you think?
Well, my intuitive feeling that it is that it might need a little bit more than that.
Okay.
Although you got to start someplace. You have to have some intuitive thing to, I don't know, like it feels like I want something more there.
Okay.
But I think it's a working definition.
Yeah, you need more meat, you could say. So how about this one? So this is from a couples counselor, Folache Akalune, I may be mispronouncing the name. Red flags are behaviors that give you serious pause or should give you serious pause, and that could sometimes indicate a larger pattern.
I think that's got more of the meat that I'm looking for.
Okay, but it's not quite there yet, right? A larger pattern. Larger pattern of what, I want to know.
Yeah. Something potentially detrimental. I think they have to have something. Otherwise, it's a larger pattern of what?
Yeah, some people actually talk about green flags, right? So you could have a larger good pattern, and you see that, and you're like, oh, that's the kind of person I want. But we want something problematic. We want something dangerous, something harmful, something bad for us in other modalities, maybe. I mean, I've seen other people talk about it as a danger sign, something, and I've seen the word deal breaker used too. And when we talk about something being a deal breaker, we mean, we won't put up with that kind of behavior. Now, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people do see red flags and then ignore them. So I don't know that definition works completely.
I think it's got to be a little bit wider than that. We can't just call it only danger signs, because there's going to be red flags that are not dangerous, but it just means that we're not going to be a match for that person.
So like maybe you would be unhappy staying with them, but there isn't anything really bad that's going to happen. It's just a lack of goods or blockage of what ought to develop or something like that.
Right. I think that's along the path that I'm looking for.
Okay. Well, let's move on a little bit. So, I mean, we do want to note that there are lots of lists of red flags out there, but it's not as if any one of these lists is perfect.
Comprehensive.
Well, it's not just that it's comprehensive. There's also kind of a relativity to this. Like some things that a person who has been traumatized pretty badly, burned in the past, as we say, something might count as a red flag for them that doesn't for the rest of us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's totally this like whole range, not only, for the individual, there's going to be these personal red flags, like what they're looking for in a partner or, a roommate or, in a business situation, all these things where you're going to be spending lots of time with these people. And so, some people, like, for example, my brother gets very annoyed at repetitive noises.
Okay.
To a greater extent than most people. And like it's fine. And I inadvertently sometimes make these repetitive noises, which does not make it like a relationship with him all that amazing all the time. But we figure out how to deal with it. But if you're going to be in a long-term relationship with someone of any sort that has these things that tend to get on your nerves more than other people, then you either need to figure out how to deal with that or to say, well, maybe I need to not find this person in my life as much.
Yeah, I was just laughing because I will make random noises of a whole variety when I'm kind of thinking or on my own. And my youngest kid does that too. And I found it irritating when she did it. And my wife pointed out to me, well, you do exactly the same thing. So I don't know why you find it irritating. And I was like, well, now I understand why it's irritating.
Yes.
So coming back to the relativity of it, I mean, we do have to talk about like cultural differences. You brought up one of those already in terms of smoking, but there could be all sorts of things, and we don't necessarily want to excuse everything on the basis of culture. So, well, that's just that person's culture, so you have to understand and put up with it. But there will be some significant variances, we could say, right?
Yeah, there's going to be, obviously, like faith couples can have some very difficult things. Not only their individual practices, but also their family's expectations of them, which can potentially be a deal breaker. If your friends or family just despise your partner, it's going to be going to put a lot of strain on that relationship, and you have to make a decision if that's something that's worth it, or can you live with potentially alienating a part of your family.
Yeah. I mean, family is kind of an interesting thing. I was just thinking about a red flag that I totally missed when I was in college and then found out that I should have paid close attention to. I went on a date with this girl, and when I was introduced to her mom took me aside and said to me, "I think you're too good for her." And I was like, wow, that's a terrible thing to say about your daughter, you know? And I reacted the wrong way, but really she was trying to warn me. And this was a person who, we went on a date. She actually came to pick me up at college up in Lakeland College, past Sheboygan, drove me down here to Milwaukee. We spent some time together. And then we went to see a concert at Shank Hall. And something went topsy-turvy. I don't know what it was, but at some point in the night, she's like, "We're leaving," and I was like, "Well, okay, that's a little weird, but okay." And I had all of my stuff in an army duffel bag, and she drove me to my mom's place, and in Waukesha at the time, and she just like dumped me off there, and she's like, "I don't ever want to see you again." And I was like, "Where the hell did this come from?" Right? Yeah. And so, her mom was trying to warn me that should have been a red flag. The very first time you meet their parent saying something strange about their kid. And, I got a ride back up to school, but I was like totally shocked by what had happened,
Yeah. So, not only the indicators you're getting directly from the person, but also from the people around them and how they react to them.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, do you have any stories about like crazy red flags that you missed at one point in time, or? I mean, I kind of think our adolescences and early 20s are probably full of these.
Sure.
Okay. None you want to say on the radio, though.
Yeah, I'm going to say that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk about other red flag examples that we tabulated up.
So, went on the internets and try to find. There's obviously some of the big ones like that get repeated often. Like if your date, if you go on a date to a restaurant and your date treats your waiter or waitress badly, then that's a good indication that they don't care about like the smaller people in life. And that's like, well, do you want to be with a person that has such little regard for the people that are potentially the serving staff? How does that respond to you if they see you as like not on their level or something, or just in general? But there's couple other ones.
That was one of the ones that my students came up with like immediately.
Oh yeah,
about dating.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
I think that you're completely right that there's a badness involved in treating people who are in a vulnerable position and have less social status. So it could be like serving staff, the bartender. It could also be how they treat people in retail stores, or how they treat secretarial staff or janitorial staff. I think those are kind of touchstones, right? And the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind, if they're going to treat other people that way, sooner or later, they're going to treat you that way. They're going to come to see you. They're going to look at you as like there to serve them, most likely. So it's a bad sign when somebody, what would you say? They're arrogant. They lord it over others.
To grab a little Immanuel Kant, to see people as
mere means,
and not ends in of themselves.
Yeah, that's actually a great way to put it. When we talk about using people, that's part of what Kant is after there, and
to instrumentalize them, to turn them into things to be used.
Yeah, as if they're like your cell phone and you're telling Siri what to do, Right.
Although, it's interesting. If we want to continue that, I feel a little bit weird when people are rude to the digital, like Siri or I shouldn't even see saying these, or the Alexa.
Yeah. Things. that I think you're onto something there.
Yeah.
And again, Kant is one of the people who points out that we can learn a lot about human beings. He's not thinking about robots or AI, but he talks about animals, and Kant thinks that there's a radical difference between us and the other non-rational animals, but somebody who treats animals badly, that should be a red flag.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's also, especially if they're like violent towards them, that's usually a precursor for other really negative things going down the line.
But it's going back to like the technology thing. So, like treating Siri as if it's just a punching bag, swearing at Siri, right? That would be a red flag, don't you think?
Yeah, a little bit. Like I obviously I don't think it's conscious, and I don't think I can actually hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
But it's a general. How do you practice to communicate with people?
Okay.
And if you're practicing to communicate people in a really rude or negative way, I guess it's one of these indicators, these gut feelings of, okay, well, if you're going to do that, which is like the lowest of the lows, it's not even conscious.
Yeah.
Hopefully. At this point in time, then how are you going to respond to other people that you might see below you?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Any other particular examples you want to bring up at this point, or?
Yeah, if the person never takes responsibility, if anything that happens to him is he always shifts the blame to someone else or something else, the situation that's a big red flag, sooner so it's going to turn back on you, because sooner or later, stuff's going to be your fault. The relationship goes sour, and it's nothing that they did. It's something that you did.
Yeah, and that would actually make it quite difficult if you wanted. A lot of relationships, there's going to be conflict of some sort. So, how do you fight fair? This is like a red flag for somebody who won't fight fair, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And then kind of maybe on the opposite end of this are people that are constantly putting, especially in a romantic relationship, that only put your needs first. Now that's an interesting one. I noticed when you're writing that down. Now, why is that a bad thing? I think some people would be like, "Oh, that's perfect for me," I would see that as a red flag, though. I'm curious to see why you would say it is. Because if they're constantly totally externally focused, then they're not seeing you as especially if you're talking about romantic partners, not seeing you as a romantic partner, but like a project, and that you're not a partner to them, you're a distraction.
Okay.
And they may not even realize this, but it's one of those things that we have to deal with.
Yeah. I think that is a very interesting topic that could be like its own whole discussion, the treating somebody as a project. That's also kind of an instrumentalizing of them, but for their own good, right?
Yeah. And it might be like a total coping mechanism, because they're they might be selfless and caring and totally doting on you, but they're actually avoiding their own problems. They're not dealing with their own things.
Yeah.
So, just another example of how this could be potentially negative, when on the surface level it might sound really great.
Yeah.
They're the super supportive partner.
Quite true. So one of the things that's a feature of red flags is that there's some of them that are really easy to notice. Let's say you're on a dating site and you're looking at people's profiles, and they're must love guns and shooting puppies or something. Why? That's it for that person, right? Huge red flags right there. Or I love to gamble with funds that I rob from the local bank. Okay, that's a big red flag right at the start as well. But I think a lot of them are harder to see and register as red flags until you're already entangled with the person. You're already involved with them. And then you're posed with some problems. Maybe some other people will criticize you and say, well, you should have noticed this before. If you had a problem with this, you should have brought it up at the start. And you might even yourself feel that way too, right? You could be like, oh, well, I don't know. Maybe I should, we second guess ourselves. Maybe I didn't notice it before because it's not really a red flag, So that's a problem.
Absolutely. This But in the new relationships, we often find ourselves, putting on a little bit of facade. We're looking at like you dress up, you put on your best clothes. You're not going to walk around being like as schlubby as you are on whenever you're not caring about what other people think. But you're putting up a little bit of a mask, the most polished version of yourself.
Well, and we're also doing this not just in romantic relationships, but in the workplace. The first week that you're there, you're like on your best behavior. Yeah,
the thing about you going on a first date, it's like going on an interview. You put on your nice suit, or you're trying to put your best foot forward, and then only like once one feels comfortable do some of these things start to eke out of the corners. And the question is, can you remain vigilant enough to actually see them once you've already become at least partially enamored with someone?
That's a good word too. Vigilant, not in the sense of like constantly being on your guard, right? But when something weird happens, to be able to register it as such and not just immediately write it off.
Right. And so, often we're so close to the situation, it's really hard for us to see them. And even if we're trying to be vigilant, that we're too close to it. And sometimes it's useful to have a sounding board, someone else that a friend that you'll ask what they think about someone instead of, because it's usually rather gauche or to go out of your way to tell your friend that you think that their partner is bad, unless it's like dangerous bad.
Yeah.
But if you trust a friend to say, like, hey, I think we have give me some feedback, then that takes away that taboo and allows you to. And
there is that dynamic too of people who are problematic or dangerous in some particular ways often try to isolate you from those sounding boards, right? So that you won't get that feedback, and then you'll be kind of second guessing yourself, as I said, and not sure of your own reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole isolation is an incredibly large red flag, but if you one of the same things that happens in these types of things is people like tell you that, like, I'm the only one that loves you and everyone else hates you or is going to
nobody appreciates you like I do. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so it's a major red flag. Then hopefully you can catch that, because if they've already got to the point of isolating you, then you're not going to be able to see it externally.
That happens in professional situations too, like with mentoring. Sometimes nobody's going to be able to coach you like I can. Don't listen to those other people over there. I know what's best for your career. So there's a power imbalance. It's not like a romantic relationship where, at least theoretically, people are equal. Right.
Is this type of mentoring that's like, employees or boss employee, or is this?
Could be. Or, I've seen this happen in academic settings where you get a professor who is going to be the director, the mentor for, a student, and they steer them the wrong way, And other people try to give them, some well-meaning advice about it, but then that's a sign that they're the problem, these other people who are giving the advice. And then they, sometimes this screws up people's careers pretty badly,
If only everything was just like so, cut and dry, and everything was.
Well, that's it. There's a kind of ambiguity to red flags, right? We often present it, this is a definite red flag. This is so clear. Well, it's often not to the people who should be noticing the red flags. A lot of times they can be, explained away.
Right.
And so this is a good place to talk about the possible range of reactions. Actually, not just possible. These are what people do in relation to red flags. And one of them is just pretend that there isn't any red flag at all there. You just bury your head in the sand like the ostrich. You make excuses for the person. You find some way to make it right in your head, at least for the time being. And if that can actually produce stable situations, provided it works out for everybody, but it's probably not going to be a good resolution to a situation, right?
Yeah, I don't know. There's such a wide variety of responses here that either you notice it and you can like immediately, like if you're so well versed in this that you're like, okay, and you know exactly what your values and the expectations in that relationship are, that you kind of like nip that in the bud.
I mean, I don't think most people fall into that category. And looking back at my own life, I certainly haven't in a lot of cases.
And then there's going to be those people that are going to ignore it for a while until it becomes too large or nagging to become too obvious for them to do it. Or people are will go through like a 30-year marriage and ignore them the entire time.
Yeah, and that's really tragic because you consume, if you have a 30-year marriage, let's say you manage to live 80 years, you've consumed not quite half, but at least half of your adult life, right? In that, and so that's quite an investment there. Another set of reactions are what we often talk about fight or flight, but there's actually 3 Fs. There's also freeze, and these are sort of like base limbic level reactions that people have. You see a red flag and you think, oh, I better argue with this person, or I'd better get away from this person, or you just freeze in place and let them do what they're going to do. And those aren't rational responses. Those are, deeply emotional responses that are not going to do us an awful lot of good. And there's other emotional reactions too. I think, with the fight, you could talk about anger or indignation. You might also feel a sense of disgust or contempt towards the person that is raising the flags. But you could also feel fear of them, especially if you've been traumatized by somebody like that before, or sadness or embarrassment or guilt or shame on your own part, which then that person might exploit,
And so, like, one of the topic here is how do we rationally respond to these things?
Yeah.
And so sticking in this kind of like lower level limbic, what was this, the sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain area. We're not talking about rational responses. This is very base level. And so how does one build structures to help bring this more up into our primary prefrontal cortex, to our rational selves?
Yeah, so that leads to another sort of response, which can be kind of successful depending on what you're doing with it. It's the inquisitive, trying to figure out, well, why do they do that? It's sort of like when you come home from elementary school and you got in a fight on the playground with the bully, and your parents are not particularly helpful because they're like, well, you must have said something, or why would they be so mean to you? And you're like, they're just a mean person, and we do this, we're naturally trying to figure out what other people's motivations are and what drives them. Is it just they're ignorant and don't understand what they're doing? Do they have bad character or bad intentions? Or is somebody else forcing them to be that way? Now, all of these are possible, but none of them provide a reason why you should ignore the red flags, right?
Right, because as we said really early on, it could be an indicator of like very negative outcomes, either like emotionally or physically.
Yeah.
And so red flag could be indicator of potential violence, and you need to break things off really quickly. And if it's not direct violence, but like emotional manipulation, this can lead to long-standing issues, as well as you're wasting your time with someone that is not trustworthy.
Yeah. And it could be, too, that the person actually is acting out of ignorance, in which case maybe giving them information or directing them towards something could change the situation. But then there's some people who are just bad actors, and they actually will pretend that they're ignorant and use it that way. So communication is useful in some cases, like laying down limits or boundaries, saying I won't put up with this. This is a red line, you better not cross it. Now, you have to be able to stick to that, though. I mean, if you lay down a line in the sand and they keep crossing it, and you keep saying, well, let me draw another line over here. You're telling somebody it's okay to keep pushing you around, right?
Yeah, this reminds me of from habit making. There's this idea of implementation intentions, where you're writing down kind of if-then statements.
Okay.
And so to say if I wake up in the morning, then I'm going to go for a 3-mile run. And so you could potentially modify this into just if-then statements about your relationship, and you say every month I'm going to revisit my list.
That's
if
a really interesting
my partner
idea.
is doing X, then I need to either confront them about this, why they're doing this, or I need to see if this is still a viable relationship.
Yeah, and maybe you plan an exit strategy or something, figure out where your support network could be. That's actually, I kind of like that. So tell me more about that. I mean, I realize this is a bit of a tangent, but how is the placing it in terms of hypotheticals? How does that help you out?
So I guess to a certain extent, this is also pulling from the Stoic practice of premeditatum malorum.
Okay.
So we're going to think about what are the negative things that could happen in the relationship, and how does one properly, rationally respond to these instances. And so as we were talking about just earlier, this whole limbic system, this really base emotional system, is going to potentially result in us making either rash or poor decisions in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
And it is much better for us to already have thought about some of these potential outcomes, negative outcomes, ahead of time, so and then you can make a plan. It's if someone does, if my partner hits me, that's a major red flag, and I know exactly that how to break off any ties with them, make sure that I'm safe from them.
Yeah.
Find the people that are, as you said, your support network, and go to them. And so you already got it all set up, so you're not blindsided.
Right, so you don't have to figure it out in the heat of the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually a great idea. I mean, it could lead to maybe over planning, somebody could have a whole notebook of if-thens, right? But it's probably better to have more of those floating around than less of those, right?
Yeah, because if you go into the relationship and just this is going to be the one, everything is going to be amazing, then when, more often than not, your relationships are not going to be kind of that forever one.
Yeah.
I've gone through quite a few. It
Me
sounds
too.
like you've gone through. I didn't marry all of them, nor did you.
Yeah, and it works that way for jobs too. I mean, people get super stoked. Oh, this is going to be the best job ever, right? And then 2 weeks into it, they find out, not quite so much. There's all these annoying factors, and so there's two counter tendencies that we were going to talk about. One, I think you started on this idea that it's all going to work out, it's all going to be great. Even though there's red flags, people will often go from relationship to relationship, and they're like, this time it's going to be different, where I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to be with somebody who pushes the same buttons, raises the same red flags, but this time I'm better prepared. I'll get through it. And that doesn't seem like a great strategy, right?
Right, and this is the same idea of why what is that? The positivity,
Are you thinking about? You're not thinking about positive psychology, where you're trying to have a preponderance of good over bad emotions, or positive over negative emotions?
Just the predisposition that everything's just going to work out. Which sets you up for potential failure because you've never actually prepared for the negative potential consequences. It's like, I just have to be positive. And then,
like trying to do it through sheer willpower, right?
Right.
Yeah. Or wishful thinking,
Right. Lots of wishful thinking,
Yeah. I mean, the other tendency is to fight the last war, as they say. You get burned in a relationship and you're like, never again, and then you get into a new relationship and somebody does some of the same stuff and you're like, they're one of those people. I have to break it off. And maybe they're doing some similar things, but maybe not with the same motivation or even with the same effects.
Right. So, like, for example, we tend to overfit, and especially like if you come out and like maybe you got cheated on, and now you're hyper vigilant about anything that you think is associated with someone being a cheater in a relationship.
Yeah.
And now they're like, oh well, they didn't respond to my texts immediately, therefore they're with someone, and thus they're cheating on me.
You go down that whole line of thinking, right?
Right, and I guess it makes sense because you've been primed from previous experience, but that does there is a whole bunch of very innocuous other reasons why they might have not responded to you.
Yeah,
especially back in the day when phone batteries didn't last as long,
right.
Or even further back.
Well, like, and coverage was bad too, right? Yeah.
Say again?
Coverage was bad, so like you'd go into a dead zone. Yeah.
But I'm just like, how did we deal with this before we had like text messaging and cell phones? So you're just like, hey, call me from the payphone.
That is indeed what we would do. I remember using payphones and like calling somebody to work something out, right? And you'd be like out there in the cold with the phone up to your ear, and you'd have to keep putting money in sometimes.
Yeah.
so ridiculous what we used to do.
It's like my experience with that is almost purely from like old episodes of Seinfeld or Mad About You or something.
Yeah.
Where like by the time that I was out of high school, we had cell phones.
Yeah. True. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into one of those, I used to walk up the hill both ways and it was snowy and all that sort of nonsense. But there, phones back in the day really did suck compared to what we have now. I mean, one phone for the whole house, and you have a very long cord, and you like have to pull it into your bedroom or something in order to have a little bit of privacy, But we could go on and on about technology stuff. Well, let's talk about what it takes to develop a mature perspective about red flags, not a knee-jerk, foolish perspective.
Yeah.
What do you think is important?
Well, I guess grab a little Aristotle here for a moment and do what the golden mean. That's neither overreacting or underreacting, that you need to be both aware and conscious of these things, but try not to overfit. But this is also one of those things that tends to develop with experience, and it's rather hard to go like, well, I'm just going to like make sure to only react to these things in the appropriate way.
Yeah, I mean, there probably aren't a whole set of rules that we could come up with that would fit every situation, right? So we need something like practical wisdom or prudence in order to sort these things through. I mean, you used that word values a while back, and I kind of like that rather than rules.
Yeah. Because rules are inherently deontological. It's like, if X do Y, or like, here's a hard line, do this, not that. And if we are putting the decision making into more of a values or virtue based way about it, you're thinking about this in a more rational ways. Like, okay, how can we look about this, and like how can I be true to myself and seeing these red flags, but also still be like potentially kind to my partner that is presenting these things, and how do I go about trying to advocate for myself and what I need, while also not totally alienating the other person.
That is actually a really great point, and I think that ties in with another. We've brought up virtue ethics and deontology, and I think you could also draw upon ethics of care, where empathy, compassion for others, a recognition of their vulnerability is important. If somebody, there are some really bad actors out there, right? But I think a lot of people who raise red flags, it's because they're dealing with damage, trauma, being mixed up themselves. And you don't have to automatically see a red flag and then let's destroy that person, or I cast you out into the darkness where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth. You could be like, listen, I don't like this thing, and this seems sketchy to me. If you're going to continue to act like this, I can't be with you, or I can't work with you, or, we can't be business partners, but I do want you to, do well. You could have that sort of response, and I think that's pretty important. That's a great point.
Yeah. And so I guess this is, developing your gut on these things.
We talked about that at the very beginning, intuition. Do you think that intuition is a good guide in this sort of thing?
As I often feel about intuition, it's a good starting point. But it's not the end all be all. Just because you have a feeling doesn't mean that feeling is an accurate representation of reality.
That is a great distinction. Making it a starting point, making it one out of several things that you're bringing to bear rather than just relying upon it. And you can say that you could make your intuition better maybe, but I don't know that you actually can.
And so my caveat is if you're feeling an intuition of danger, then it's probably good to, especially if it's immediate, to act on it rather than not. But if it's not an immediate danger, then sit and really contemplate this, because you are getting some signals from some part of your brain that says that there's something wrong. But sometimes the stick on the path in the forest is a stick, and sometimes it's a snake.
Yeah, this is a bit off topic, but I used to work security on second and third shift, and you get a little bit sleep deprived when you work those kinds of shifts, and it's dark, and you're wandering around, you're being vigilant because you're unless you're a bad security guard, you're not being vigilant, right? And exactly that happens. You'll see a stick. And I guess you could call it a kind of hallucination. You'll hallucinate that stick into being a snake. Or another one that I would see quite often would be certain kinds of bushes would look like a deer, just a deer standing still, And you know what? And you could tell yourself rationally, that is not a deer. I've walked past this every day for the last week. That is a bush. But it's not your eyes seeing it, it's your brain seeing it as such, right?
And our brains are incredible pattern matching machines.
That's true.
And they will sometimes match things that are not actually matches.
Yeah.
It's like, hell, look at any one of your power outlets. Your brain goes, that looks like a little face.
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody actually at Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, they have those newer drinking fountains where there's the thing to fill the water bottle up, and so there's a spigot and stuff like that. And they took two googly eyes and pasted them right on top of that. And as soon as you see the googly eyes, you can't not see the spigot as a little mouth trunk kind of thing,
Yeah. So
well,
did we?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, you elicited some responses from social media, or any of those that you really liked?
Yeah, earlier today I put it out there in Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Mastodon. And I got more responses in Facebook than anywhere else, but a lot of the responses were actually kind of off base, So we're going to talk about some of those in a bit. But here are some of the better ones. So this was actually in Mastodon, and the person later on clarified that they didn't mean what I took them to mean. So they wrote, people who open the relationship by naming some abstract value they espouse. Now I took open the relationship to mean like taking like a exclusive relationship and turning it non-exclusive, like, saying we're going to have an open marriage or something like that, right? And then they clarified that what they meant is begin the relationship. But I responded to that and I was like, yeah, actually that kind of makes sense. I mean, if you're in a committed relationship and your partner is like, yeah, we're going to start seeing other people without like consulting you on that, and then they appeal to some sort of, abstract value or they read something in a magazine, that should be a red flag. And I think that could also apply to business contexts, right? Where you say, these are the rules of the game. Here's what the workplace looks like. And now I'm going to arbitrarily change the rules, maybe bring in some new vendors or something like that without consulting you. And I'm going to do it on the basis of efficiency or pick whatever else you want. I do think that's a red flag. What do you think?
Yeah, anytime they need in sort of a relationship, especially if like, there's supposed to be some, like in a romantic relationship, there's back and forth, obviously. Right. And so one person doesn't get to, summarily just go, oh, well, we're going to change the nature of this relationship. That has to be a agreed upon thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in most business, especially if you're talking about like a boss versus employee, it's a dictatorial organization, and so like they get to do whatever they want, I guess. And so and your response is, I might leave, which doesn't seem like a really good response for actually creating a better workplace. It just means like, hopefully that your boss isn't, a bad person.
Yeah.
And but if you're talking about like business partners, then that's going to be something that's should have a back and forth there.
Yeah, I would say too, going from my own experience, when you have like, let's say you're supplying a product to somebody, I learned that you have to build into a contract that you get like 3 rewrites and then you start paying per hour, because otherwise you'll get people who are like, yeah, I like what you got here, but I want it completely different. Can we start from the ground up? And you're like, I've already put like 100 hours into this, that's that kind of, it's not opening the relationship, but it's changing the conditions of what was being expected.
Right. And that's why they're a good contract is incredibly important within business. Otherwise, people are going to take advantage of you.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, this should be a red flag. Well, we don't really need a contract. We're all good flag. People. We're all, we can all get along. Yeah.
No. Any others that you particularly liked?
Well, I wanted to see what you think about this one. So when a non-scientist appeals to quantum mechanics to support a claim with little to no support otherwise. Now, I don't think that it has to be necessarily quantum mechanics. I think it could be any buzzword. So it could be, neuroscience. It could be, pick whatever you like, whatever the flavor of the day is. I think there's a lot of people who use... And they may not even appeal to quantum mechanics. They'll just use the word quantum. Oh, we got a quantum computer here. And you're like, what's exactly quantum about it? How is this connected to it? I think there's a lot of this stuff out there among, new agers and people who are kind of woo-woo. But I think this permeates the business world too. And I see it all the time in educational institutions,
There are so many like snake oil salesmen in the business world. I was like, I've got the new big thing, like, and I guess I haven't really looked into like Six Sigma, but like that's definitely one of these like buzzwordy type things. And they got like this whole like marketing approach to it, and they sell all these classes and whatnot.
Well, that might actually be a good. I mean, I'm not going to say that every group that sells a curriculum is raising a red flag, But the fact that there's like a big slick curriculum out there ought to make us at least a little suspicious, right?
Right. And going back to this, like specifically the quantum, I think that this is like what Deepak Chopra is constantly talking
That's
about.
That's true, yeah.
It's just like, and like waves, it's like, it's the quantum or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've seen him like be like confronted by like a quantum physicist. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, none of those things that you're saying make any sense, but it's like this, as I said, it's a buzzword to like kind of like wipe off. But I wonder, is this like red flags in relation to relationships, or into like if you want to believe someone that's making a point?
Well, I mean, if somebody in your relationship is constantly talking about quantum this and that, that's probably a bad sign, you know. But I think that's more like a red flag about like things in the general culture, people trying to sell you a program that you should get involved in, right?
I guess it definitely comes to the idea of how does people come to on their conclusions. If their epistemology allows them to believe someone that says like, you know, these essential oils are going to cure your cancer, then I'm going to be suspect of how they actually came to believe those things in the first place.
It's interesting because it's not quite an appeal to authority, the fallacy that we would maybe place us under, but it's more like an appeal to a well-known but not well understood product, methodology, buzzword, something like that.
Yeah, like sometimes it will be a appeal to authority if you're like, oh well, like, you know, Dr. what's his name who got his you know, the Buenos Aires University for herbology and rocks and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, sure, like he sounds cool, but he might just be a snake oil salesman, and just because there's a whole bunch of people that talk about this, it's like, you know, this is, I guess, my a particular issue with like astrology. Astrology has been around for, you know, thousands of years now.
Well, this is a good one because we're gonna run out of time pretty quickly, but so I think we can only do one more. So one that they talked about: people who appeal to personality traits to excuse behavior and do the same with others. Also, they said appealing to horoscopes, right? Saying, well, this person or I am this way. Like people do this with the Myers-Briggs. I'm this kind of person, therefore I have to behave this way. To me, that should be. I think that is a legitimate red flag. What do you think?
I'd absolutely agree. Like I want to be, you know, judged by my own actions, and those things aren't essentialist. That, you know, just because either, you know, Myers-Briggs or whatever, you know, horoscope you might be says these things, it should absolutely not excuse. You know, if you are an angry person and are, I guess, what do they call it, like a fire sign or whatever, and you're hot-headed or whatnot, no, that's something you should be working on with your like therapist or something, because just because you know, someone else says something doesn't give you an out.
Well, that is pretty much all the time we have. So do you want to lead us out on a final thought?
So we leave you the words of Mahir Seti. You know, it's funny. When you look at someone through rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags.